The Eastern Front burns like a scar across Europe. Soviet tank divisions roll endlessly toward the German lines, steel beasts stretching to the horizon. The Luftwaffe scrambles in desperation. Above the frozen fields of Kursk, a distinct wail echoes, the siren of a U-87 Stuka dive bomber. At its controls, Hans-Ulrich Rudel, 27 years old, eyes locked forward, cold as the snow beneath. Rudel isn't just another pilot. By this point, he's flown more than 1,500 combat missions, a number so insane that even his commanders call him unstoppable. His target today? A Soviet armored column, 40 T-34 tanks moving through a forest road. Rudel dives, not from high altitude, but nearly vertical, hugging the ground so low his propeller blades slice through tree branches. It's suicide, but that's his impossible trick. He attacks from below the Soviet gunner's field of view, aiming his twin 37mm bored Kanone directly into the tank's rear armor. The shells punch through engine blocks like paper. One shot, one explosion, then another, then another. Within minutes, the forest is hell. 14 tanks burning, crews fleeing. Soviet soldiers later swear they saw the devil himself in the sky. Rudel pulls up, engine screaming, smoke rising behind him. His gunner shouts over the radio, 14 confirmed kills. Rudel simply nods. For him, it's just another day. By nightfall, his tally reaches 202 tanks destroyed, a number that would make any ace immortal. For Rudel, it's only the beginning.
Rudel's secret wasn't just skill, it was audacity. Most pilots dive from 3,000 meters or higher, giving anti-aircraft gunners time to react. Rudel, he mastered the ground-hugging dive, an impossible maneuver that combines speed, precision, and nerves of steel. Flying just 50 meters above the frozen terrain, he threaded his U-87 Stuka between trees, hedgerows, and enemy fire, positioning himself for the perfect strike against the weakest armor of Soviet tanks. Every dive was calculated. He memorized Soviet tank formations, armor thickness, and weak spots. The 37mm cannons of his Stuka could pierce up to 75 millimeters of armor at close range, lethal if aimed at the engine or rear compartment. Rudel would line up 4 to 6 tanks in a column, timing his release perfectly. The first shell would ignite engines, the second would trap panicked crews, and the third ensured total destruction. But this wasn't without danger. Soviet AA guns, machine guns, and even the ground itself could turn deadly. Rudel crashed once, lost his landing gear, and was forced to ditch, yet survived, patched up, and returned to the skies within weeks. His resilience became legendary. By mid-1943, his impossible trick had earned him over 250 confirmed tank kills. Soviet infantry whispered tales of the German ace who descended from the sky like a falling stone, unstoppable and precise. Even fellow Luftwaffe pilots hesitated to mimic his method. It was too risky, too daring, too Rudel. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a one-man anti-tank weapon, a nightmare in the air. Every mission brought more destruction, more fear, and more proof that his approach defied conventional warfare. And yet, behind the myth, Rudel remained obsessively meticulous, studying each battlefield, calculating angles, distances, and velocities, as though war itself were a complex mathematical puzzle he alone could solve.
It was March 1943, near the freezing steppes outside Kharkov, when Rudel would cement his reputation. He climbed into his J-87 Stuka, J-87 G2, fitted with twin 37mm cannons, the weapon that made his impossible trick lethal. The air was thick with tension. The Soviets had fortified their positions with rows of T-34 tanks, over 30 armored vehicles in tight formation. Most pilots avoided diving so low. Rudel didn't. As he approached the target zone, he dropped to 50 meters above the ground, weaving through the smoke and tree lines. His first 37mm shell smashed the engine of a T-34, flames erupting instantly. The tank's crew scrambled, but there was no escape. The second shell struck the next tank, and the third pierced the rear compartment of a third T-34, sending it spinning across the frozen earth. Each movement was choreographed. Fire, climb slightly, adjust for wind, dive again. Rudel's timing was flawless. Within 10 minutes, he destroyed 7 tanks, an almost unheard-of feat for a single pilot. The ground troops, both German and Soviet, paused, witnessing the chaos from below. His colleagues radioed in disbelief. His superiors logged the kills meticulously. This mission didn't just destroy tanks, it shattered morale. Soviet forces retreated under the psychological weight of an enemy who could strike with deadly precision from the sky. Rudel landed, greased the wheels of his J-87 on the frozen runway, and immediately began planning the next sortie. What made this mission unforgettable wasn't only the destruction, it was the method. He had proven the impossible trick worked, that a single pilot could change the tide of a localized battle. By the end of March, Rudel had already accumulated over 20 confirmed tank kills, and his legend was just beginning. By April 1943, Hans-Ulrich Rudel had transformed from a daring pilot into a one-man weapon of war, feared across the Eastern Front. His early victories were no longer anomalies. They marked the start of a relentless campaign of destruction that would eventually see him destroy over 150 Soviet tanks. What set Rudel apart wasn't just courage. It was a methodical, almost surgical approach to warfare. Flying the Ju-87G2 Stuka, armed with twin 37mm cannons, he perfected his impossible trick. Diving at 50 to 100 meters above enemy lines to attack armored vehicles with deadly precision. Most pilots considered this suicidal, but Rudel understood the battlefield in a way few could. He used the terrain, frozen rivers, ridges, abandoned villages, as both cover and advantage, striking from unexpected angles. Tanks that seemed invulnerable fell under his fire. Crews panicked at the whistling approach of a Stuka, knowing a single hit could destroy their machine and their lives in an instant. During 1 week in the Donbass region, Rudel executed multiple sorties per day, taking out 17 tanks while dodging anti-aircraft fire and small arms. Each attack was a careful calculation: approach, target weak points, fire, climb, and repeat. His calm under pressure was unmatched. Even as bullets rattled through his fuselage, he adjusted trajectory and aim with precision. Ground observers and fellow pilots alike marveled at his combination of fearlessness and strategy, realizing that he was more than a pilot. He was a tactical genius. Beyond tactics, Rudel's discipline ensured his aircraft was always combat-ready. Every sortie began with a meticulous inspection of the Ju-87G2, ensuring every cannon, engine, and control surface functioned flawlessly. By month's end, Rudel had cemented his reputation not only as a tank destroyer extraordinaire, but also as a symbol of psychological terror for Soviet forces. His impossible trick was no longer theory. It was a verified, terrifying reality on the battlefield.
By the summer of 1943, Rudel's reputation had spread like wildfire across the Eastern Front. Soviet commanders whispered of the U-87 Phantom, a single Stuka pilot capable of annihilating entire armored units in a single day. What made him terrifying wasn't just his precision, it was his unrelenting persistence. Rudel often flew 4 or 5 missions per day, sometimes returning with his aircraft riddled by enemy fire, yet still landing safely to plan the next attack. His impossible trick, attacking from extremely low altitude with near-perfect aim, allowed him to exploit weaknesses in even the most heavily armored T-34s. He calculated approach angles meticulously, timing his dives so that each 37mm cannon round struck tracks, engines, or turrets with deadly accuracy. Tanks that seemed impervious to artillery melted under his fire, and crews either abandoned them or were annihilated before help could arrive. In one intense week near Kharkov, Rudel personally destroyed 23 tanks, leaving a trail of chaos and stunned Soviet defenders. Rudel's aerial dominance wasn't limited to tanks alone. He coordinated with ground troops and fellow Luftwaffe pilots, using reconnaissance to anticipate enemy movements, striking armored convoys before they could reach strategic positions. His combination of bold aggression and tactical foresight made him indispensable to German operations. Yet behind the legend was a man constantly calculating risk. Every sortie involved danger, not only from anti-aircraft fire, but also from the freezing winter winds, unpredictable terrain, and the chaos of battle. Despite the ever-present threats, Rudel's determination never wavered. He became the embodiment of lethal precision and battlefield ingenuity, a pilot whose impossible trick redefined what was possible from the cockpit of a Stuka. By the end of this phase of the campaign, Rudel had cemented his status as the most feared tank destroyer in history, his name whispered in dread across Soviet encampments and celebrated in the Luftwaffe as a living legend.
By late 1943, Rudel had perfected the maneuver that would etch his name into military history. Known as the low-altitude track strike, this impossible trick involved diving from just 50 meters above the ground, targeting the vulnerable tracks of Soviet tanks with surgical precision. At this altitude, Rudel could make split-second adjustments mid-dive, compensating for moving targets and uneven terrain. His Stuka's 37mm cannon and bombs became instruments of exacting destruction. During the Battle of Kursk, Rudel executed this daring tactic against a concentration of over 40 Soviet tanks. He would approach at nearly treetop level, weaving between anti-aircraft fire, and release his ordnance with deadly accuracy. Tanks that seemed invincible crumpled under his attack, immobilized by destroyed tracks or obliterated turrets. Entire armored convoys ground to a halt, their crews scrambling for survival as smoke and fire enveloped the battlefield. Rudel's ability to strike so decisively from such a perilous height became legendary. Even German commanders watched with awe as he repeatedly emerged from impossible situations unscathed. But the maneuver was not without risk. Flying so low exposed him to small arms fire, artillery, and enemy fighters. On multiple occasions, Rudel returned to base with over 1,000 bullet holes in his aircraft. Yet each time, he meticulously assessed damage and planned his next sortie. His unwavering courage, paired with meticulous calculation, meant that he could strike fear into Soviet tank crews even before they saw him. By the end of this campaign, Rudel had destroyed over 150 tanks in total, more than any single individual in the war. Each strike reinforced his reputation not as a reckless pilot, but as a master of battlefield strategy, whose impossible trick combined daring audacity with precise, methodical execution.
The intensity of Rudel's missions was staggering. Day after day, he faced a relentless torrent of Soviet defenses, anti-aircraft flak, concentrated tank fire, and waves of fighter planes. Each sortie demanded not just skill, but nerves of steel. Despite the danger, Rudel's focus never wavered. His intimate knowledge of terrain, coupled with countless hours studying enemy formations, allowed him to anticipate movements that would have trapped less experienced pilots. During one particularly brutal engagement near Orel, Rudel's Stuka was struck repeatedly by machine gun fire. The cockpit shuddered with each impact, instruments shattered, glass splintered. Yet, he executed a daring evasive maneuver, skimming just 50 meters above frozen fields, releasing bombs precisely on the tracks of a Soviet tank regiment. Within minutes, over a dozen tanks were immobilized, and Rudel's squadron could press the advantage. His co-pilots, inspired by his calm precision under fire, often described the moment as witnessing a man who danced with death and commanded it to obey. But even heroes are not immune to fatigue. Rudel endured exhaustion, hunger, and the psychological toll of seeing devastation unfold beneath him. Each kill, while a military success, weighed on him as he recognized the human lives affected. His unwavering commitment to precision meant that he struck at military targets alone, avoiding unnecessary civilian casualties whenever possible. By the end of this phase, Rudel's tally had climbed to over 150 Soviet tanks destroyed. His legendary impossible trick, low-altitude strikes targeting tracks, was no longer just a tactic. It had become a psychological weapon, demoralizing enemy tank crews before they even faced him. His name became synonymous with calculated audacity, and stories of his daring exploits spread across both Axis and Allied forces, cementing his place as one of World War II's most feared and respected pilots.
Rudel's signature tactic had earned its name for good reason. Known as the Rudel slide, it involved diving at extremely low altitude, often below 50 meters, directly onto enemy tank formations. The precision required was almost impossible. One miscalculation, one flinch, and his Stuka would be obliterated by anti-aircraft fire or a sudden tank gun response. Yet Rudel executed it flawlessly, again and again, turning desperation into innovation. During the summer offensive near Kursk, Rudel faced over 40 Soviet tanks converging on a strategic village. Most pilots would have attacked from safer altitudes, but Rudel knew that only a low, precise approach could disable the tank's tracks and halt the advance without risking prolonged exposure to enemy flak. His Stuka roared like a predator above the fields, wings cutting through the heat haze as bombs were released with surgical accuracy. Every strike immobilized a tank. Every missed shot was adjusted instinctively in the next pass. Witnesses on the ground, both Axis and captured Soviet soldiers, would later describe the almost surreal precision. Tanks that should have moved freely were suddenly frozen in mud, their crews scrambling in panic. Rudel's impossible trick didn't just destroy hardware, it shattered morale. Commanders hesitated, soldiers feared advancing, and Rudel's reputation grew to legendary status. Even with success, the human cost was ever present. Rudel's co-pilots, flying alongside him, noted the intense mental strain required to maintain such focus. Fatigue could mean death. Yet, through hundreds of sorties, he maintained remarkable consistency, earning a reputation as a pilot who not only survived impossible odds, but dictated the battlefield with sheer skill and audacity. By the end of this phase, Rudel had personally destroyed over 150 tanks and countless vehicles, his daring low-level tactics remaining unmatched in aerial warfare history, a testament to his unique combination of bravery, calculation, and near-superhuman precision. As the war raged on, Rudel's feats became the stuff of legend, whispered in mess halls and command rooms alike. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a phenomenon, a young man of 25 years whose impossible trick redefined what was thought achievable in aerial combat. His Stuka dives had decimated over 150 Soviet tanks, turning entire offensives on their head, leaving enemies shaken and allies inspired. Yet beyond the statistics and the accolades, there was a human story. Rudel carried the weight of each mission, aware that one mistake could mean instant death. He wrote letters home, spoke with comrades, and even in the heat of battle, a sense of strategy governed every movement. Courage alone was not enough. His success depended on focus, planning, and a deep understanding of both his aircraft and the battlefield. The impossible trick was more than a tactic. It was a symbol of ingenuity and audacity. Tanks destroyed, positions halted, and soldiers spared by his precision, these outcomes were tangible proof of how one individual could alter the course of war. Generals and pilots alike studied his methods, attempting to emulate his low-altitude, high-precision strikes, though few could ever match his intuition and nerve. By the end of the conflict, Rudel's name was etched in history, not merely as a pilot who destroyed hundreds of tanks, but as a young innovator whose daring reshaped aerial combat strategy. His story serves as a reminder that sometimes the extraordinary emerges not from brute force, but from creativity, courage, and a single mind daring to defy the impossible. Even decades later, historians, veterans, and enthusiasts still marvel at the audacity of a 25-year-old German who took on impossible odds and won. The legend of Rudel's impossible trick remains a benchmark of courage, precision, and the indomitable human spirit.
The roar of engines and the whistling wind filled the sky as Rudel's J-87 Stuka screamed toward the Dniester River. Every dive, every bomb release was a calculated risk, and today the odds were higher than ever. Anti-aircraft fire rained from below, tracer rounds slicing through the smoke and clouds. Rudel, calm yet hyper-aware, adjusted the dive angle, keeping his target in sight, a column of Soviet armor advancing through the frozen fields. A sudden jolt rocked the Stuka. A flak shell had struck the left wing. Rudel's hands, steady but tense, wrestled with the controls. Smoke filled the cockpit, obscuring instruments, burning his eyes. He realized the aircraft would not make it back to base. With no time to lose, he executed a controlled crash landing near the riverbank, a maneuver born of skill, desperation, and instinct honed through hundreds of missions. The plane slammed into the ice, shards scattering, metal groaning under the impact. Rudel escaped just as the Stuka began to catch fire, flames licking the fuselage. Cold, wet, and bleeding from minor cuts, he crawled to the riverbank, hidden under the low cover of snowdrifts and sparse trees. Every snap of a branch, every whistle of wind felt like the enemy closing in. He knew the Soviets were hunting him. Stalin himself had authorized the bounty, and every soldier in the area had orders to stop him at all costs. Hours passed. The cold gnawed at him, the adrenaline slowly fading, but Rudel moved with purpose. Using a combination of camouflage, terrain knowledge, and instinct, he crossed the river under cover of night, disappearing into the forest beyond. By dawn, he was miles away, wounded but alive. The impossible had happened again. A man, his plane destroyed, odds stacked against him, had survived. A legend not only in the air, but on the ground. Rudel would fly again, he would fight again, and the Soviets would remember his name for the destruction he had wrought.